Frequency Podcast Network. Stories that matter, podcasts that resonate.
They've already endeared themselves to many, becoming the unofficial mascot for one of Canada's largest cities. We're looking at a new study that shows they're slowly being domesticated. We're talking about urban raccoons here, the ones you may see rooting through your trash. Research from the University of Arkansas Little Rock shows they could be evolving to have a shorter snout, a key physical trait of pets. I'm Kaitlin Lee, and today on The Big Story, we're talking all things raccoons. And joining us today to discuss is evolutionary ecologist Albrecht Schulte-Hostedde from Laurentian University. Thank you so much for talking with us.
Yeah, no problem.
You weren't involved in this particular study, but you do study the evolutionary habits of animals and domestication. So, I mean, when you're reading this, does it sound familiar? Is it stuff that you've noticed?
Well, have I noticed it? I mean, how do you notice whether raccoons are domesticating themselves? I mean, it's an interesting question that has been pondered. I mean, the question is, what are the consequences of urban living for any wildlife that finds itself thriving in the urban environment? The urban environment is completely different to the natural environment in many, many ways. And it's not surprising that animals are adapting to that. Now, whether those adaptations are consistent with what we might call domestication is a different thing. And so, it's an interesting hypothesis, this idea that having access to food and whether there are some other, variables that might come into play that lead to animals like raccoons, appearing to look like they are domesticated. At least in this case, it's what we call morphologically, right? Like their physical appearance is changing, or that's what this study has implied based on the results that they came up with.
Yeah, and I mean, I know a lot of people who think raccoons are very cute already, so that might be maybe some anecdotal evidence that they're becoming domesticated. I know I've also noticed, if you live in Toronto, you notice raccoons everywhere, and they seem to be very comfortable sometimes with humans. And I know even when I went to Point Pelee, not even urban raccoons, but raccoons that were used to people were coming up and trying to take our food. So, like, are there other habits or things that might suggest that this evolutionary process is happening?
Well, raccoons are very behaviorally flexible. I mean, that's very clear. And just like any animal, if you're feeding it regularly, like, they will become comfortable around you. So, I mean, raccoons are not the only urban animals that are fed and become more comfortable around people. So, I mean, how many people are feeding coyotes in their backyard, right? In Toronto, like that's probably the basis for a lot of the coyote problems that you've been hearing about in urban areas like Toronto. Foxes and these other types of urban sort of mesocarnivores, we call them. They're very adaptable, and people will feed them. And raccoons are the same things. I remember, I was sleeping in a tent in someone's backyard. I can't remember when. It was 15, 20 years ago. And all you hear is, in the night, we had been, eating and drinking in the backyard, and a lot of the stuff had been left out. And the raccoons are all over the place, right? Like, they become very comfortable very easily. And whether that is an evolutionary change that's led to these animals becoming more comfortable around people, that's unclear. I mean, it's probably more consistent with their profound behavioral flexibility, which makes them very successful in novel environments like urban, like cities.
And I mean, just because you're hearing, that they're becoming cuter, maybe they're domesticating, doesn't necessarily mean you should go and get one off the street and make it your pet.
Well, we can talk about whether they are domesticating. I mean, what does that mean? But yes, I would not get a raccoon as a pet. I have, maybe we'll talk about it later, but, I've been working with raccoons a little bit for the past few years, or past probably 10 years. And, I was struck. Urban raccoons are interesting, but I've been particularly struck by, like, this video I saw, which had this an older man with a bunch of raccoons clawing at his door. And he opens the door. He's calling them by name. He sits down on his porch, and he has this Tupperware box full of hot dogs, like hot dog wieners, and he hands them, like the raccoons are crawling over him, like they are over his head, they are over his shoulders, they're in his lap, and he starts handing out hot dog wieners to each of them, and they grab them with their, their hands look like people's hands, right? Like they're very, they're able to, they grab on and then they walk away. And don't ever do that, right? Like raccoons carry raccoon roundworm, which is a very, it's a terrible parasite to get. They carry viruses like canine distemper, or, I mean, the rabies, obviously, although that's, there's certainly a very successful, at least in Toronto and Southern Ontario, there's a very successful rabies vaccine sort of program that's run by the Ontario government. But nonetheless, I would never do it. Let's just leave it at that.
Fair enough. And I mean, I was talking to my mother about this podcast episode and the topic, and she was saying, you could never have a raccoon as a pet because they would get in all the cupboards and they would get in all the trash. They're
they're
so
super
nimble.
Behaviorally very flexible, and they can get themselves clearly into trouble, I imagine. I would never have one in my own.
So I guess noticing these behaviors, whether it's domestication, evolution, or maybe they're just, adapting to their environment, what is our responsibility, I guess, as the humans in this situation? Because, they've been here for a while. From what I understand, they're, indigenous to this area.
Of course. Yeah. They're
So
native
what is-
wildlife for sure.
Yeah. So I guess do we have a responsibility to them? Maybe that's a tough question.
Well, no, I don't know if it's a tough question. I mean, I think it's an ethical question, right? So what responsibility do we have towards the wildlife that we are coexisting with in our urban areas? Well, I mean, in some ways you would want to minimize conflict with wildlife, right? So, for example, what are the kinds of things that lead to conflict? Well, it's usually over food, right? These animals are looking for things to eat, and so we should be more mindful about how we deal with human food waste. And that's a major issue. Like when we talk about raccoons, or if we talk about other, like vermin, I'll say vermin but rats and mice are big problems right now in many urban centers. Like, anecdotally, you hear about pest control companies being very busy with issues with rats and mice. And a lot of that is driven by our lack of, I'll say, security around human food waste. Like it's sitting out there, and these animals are using it, are eating it, and then that helps them reproduce and survive. And so you end up with many of these conflicts that exist. So I would argue that that's probably one of the main issues.
So, I mean, we've been over, don't go out in the street and get a raccoon taken to your house.
Jesus, no.
But
never.
can you see, I guess, how long does that process kind of take? Because could you see maybe in like 100 years or hundreds of years, people having raccoons as pets, like cats or dogs?
Well, unlikely, I would suggest.
Okay.
I mean, there's two questions, perhaps the two layers to this question. The one is, do we expect that raccoons that live in urban areas, will they evolve into sort of more domesticated sort of phenotype, we'll call it? And that's probably true. If you fast forward, I don't know, 50, 100 generations of raccoon generations, whatever that is, 5 years or something, then you might expect to see, profound differences, I suppose. They've been around in cities for a long time already. So, tracking this sort of initial stage of we'll call domestication in quotes, I would expect to see changes. It wouldn't be surprising. Whether that will lead to people being able to keep them as pets, unlikely, I would think. I mean, it's the evolutionary changes that led to, for example, wolves to become dogs took a long time. And I would be very hesitant to make any predictions about whether people will be keeping raccoons as domesticated pets the way we keep, cats and dogs and so on. That's, yeah.
And I mean, you mentioned some of your work when you studied raccoons, other animals. Why is this something, I guess, of interest to you? Why is this animal interesting, in your opinion, to study?
What's interesting to me is that raccoons are so adaptable in a sense, and maybe that's not the right word to use, but they are able to live very successfully in cities. Right. And in most cases, cities are a death knell for many species. Right. That is that these habitat alterations that lead, songbirds are a perfect example. I mean, how many songbirds die because they hit the windows of the buildings? Right. There are armies of volunteers that collect the dead bodies of songbirds that hit, towers, the windows and die during migration, right? So just to say that, like, there's a lot of species that don't do well in urban areas, whereas raccoons, they do wonderfully well. And one of the reasons also is that they feed on human food waste. And so, one of the things that I'm interested in is how raccoons and their so-called health reflects human health, right? So, we did some work that found that raccoons that live in areas where they have greater access to human food waste actually have like remarkably elevated blood glucose levels, right? Which is consistent with, like, I'm not going to say they're diabetic, but this is consistent, right, with our, the Western lifestyle where you have like really high levels of obesity, high levels of diabetes, and we see that in raccoons. Right. That is that, at least in the study that we had, raccoons are much, much heavier when they have access to human food waste, and they have these elevated blood glucose levels. And we were looking at other, physiological parameters associated with those kinds of things. But I find that super interesting that maybe, our diet, which has consequences for our physiology, also has downstream consequences to, toward the animals that feed on that human food waste. So that's one aspect that I find interesting. And anyway, I could go on, but that's sort of, I see, in some ways, raccoons are a reflection of ourselves, right? That is that they're a reflection of the diets that we ourselves are eating. And so I find that kind of fascinating.
That is fascinating. And I guess it speaks to maybe why people are so fascinated with them. Not just because, they obviously they haven't studied, they don't know the details, blood glucose levels.
No,
but
that's
like
not what
the
I'm saying.
fact that, sorry, what?
No. I find they're interesting because there's many reasons. Of course, they're aesthetically attractive, they're cute, right? And they're I think there's a certain admiration for their intuitiveness, and their capacity to, let's look at those green bins, right? Those giant green bins that they were developing. Like, well, first of all, raccoons get into them very easily, right? And then they develop these new ways of like locking them shut. And the raccoons figure out how to twist the lock, right, to open them. Like, it's pretty amazing. So, there's a certain respect, I imagine, that people may have for this animal.
How crafty they are, and
crafty.
Yeah,
that's the right word.
Exactly,
They're crafty. Yeah.
And obviously, it comes back to the beginning. People think they're cute.
Yeah,
whether they are evolving.
Yeah, no, for sure.
People think they're adorable. I have a Christmas tree ornament. You can see my Christmas tree in the background.
Yeah.
Of a little raccoon.
Yeah.
Because I live in Toronto, so.
Yeah. Well, actually, no, it's funny you should say that because we are starting a project looking at some of these questions about so-called domestication syndrome and raccoons. And my graduate student, who's going to be doing the project, is obsessed with raccoons. Like, he is I've never met anyone who is as excited about raccoons as this guy. So anyway, I can appreciate the interest
and
that people have.
And I think there's something to that in you mentioned mice and other animals that might be digging through your trash. I don't think people have the same fascination necessarily with like mice or rats.
No, of course not.
Yeah.
Of course not.
Perfect. Any other thoughts that you have on this study or where you see the future of raccoons going?
The future of raccoons themselves, or the future of research around raccoons? I mean, I think the raccoons are interesting because, there's a lot of questions, I guess, that we can ask about raccoons, about why they are, you know, changing, right? I mean, we'll call it domestication just for, although, as I just said earlier, maybe I might be quibble about the use of that term, but, like, I think it's pretty clear that things are changing. So, the study that came out, there's been some criticism about it. No study's perfect, of course, but there are different subspecies of raccoons. And this study may not have taken that into account when they were collecting their data, or at least analyzing their data. And the data that they did use was from citizen science photos that were taken from people's trail cams and things like that. But even other work beyond the current study have suggested that there are, sort of changes that are happening to raccoons as a result of their living in cities. The most important thing, like, to test these ideas, you need to be able to, like, compare, like, urban raccoons to sort of natural raccoons, right? And so I'm not even really sure where, like, it's not easy to find, I don't think, or to study raccoons in their natural habitat. I imagine that their population densities are relatively low compared to what you see in urban areas. And so that's actually a challenge that we're trying to figure out, is how to get access to raccoons that are from a natural environment so we can make that comparison, right? Because, I mean, it's one thing to say that people say that raccoons are cute and therefore they must be becoming cuter. I mean, we don't know that for sure, right? And so, in fact, one study that has looked at raccoon skulls and over time, so they've used museum samples, right? So they've got raccoon skulls in museums, and you can track changes in raccoon skull shape and size, and even I think they looked at tooth size as well, and they did find changes that have been occurring over time as a result of urbanization. So that all of that points to sort of some interesting questions about why this is happening. Access to food is one, but the other consideration, something my graduate student has brought up, is that people may be less likely to kill raccoons that are cuter, right? So if you see raccoons that are cuter, like, you may be less likely to call pest control to come in and do something about those raccoons, right? And so those are interesting. Raccoons may evolve the capacity to avoid avoid traffic, right? Or roads, because those are sources of mortality. So, there's all kinds of other interesting things. We're interested in brain morphology. Are there differences in the brain between urban raccoons and ones that are not urban? There are certain parts of the brain that are associated with, stress and dealing with stressful sort of situations. And so, I mean, I don't know all the details, but my student has been looking at that kind of thing to look at. So we've got to get our hands on some raccoon brains to try to take a look at that.
Interesting words.
Yeah.
I'm gonna get
well, I'll tell you a story.
Brains.
I have done some work. So I'll just very quickly tell you,
sure.
I've done in the past, we did some work on, like, I'm interested in dental health of raccoons, actually. So raccoons eat human food, right? High in carbohydrates, lots of sugar, right? Corn syrups and everything, right? And,
so are they getting cavities then?
Well, this is what I'm trying to find out. Yes. We find evidence. I mean, I haven't published it yet, so it's very difficult to sort of say, too much about it. But the idea is that, yes, these raccoons are eating high carb diets, and they should have really crabby teeth as a result, right? They should have cavities. They should have and in fact, I won't show it to you, but I've got a skull of an old raccoon that's got, like, the canine teeth. They're supposed to have, like, they're carnivores. They're supposed to have, these things are like down, like they're black nubs.
Oh no.
Yeah, like, it's brutal. So that's been sort of an interest of mine too, is to try, like, raccoons live long enough for you to see the consequences of this diet on their oral health. And like, rats and mice don't live very long, and if they eat a lot of sugar, like, they'll be dead before the teeth will break down. But with the raccoons, they live long enough, and so we can see evidence of this. So yeah, I had a student. So two things. One, I had a project where I actually had the city of Toronto collect dead raccoons from roadkill. And so I had a student go down and pick up all these carcasses from them and drive them back up here to Sudbury. And then she had to cut their heads off.
Oh my goodness.
They were dead. So, I mean, it didn't matter in the end.
Okay.
But, well, of course they were. I mean, they were roadkill, right? So they were frozen and sitting in, yeah. Anyways, just to say that we were trying to get access to their teeth, right? We needed to and we had to, we took the heads to the Royal Ontario Museum where they have this, this box of, I mean, it's like a whole colony of these beetles that will eat all of the flesh off bones, so that you can get access to the actual skull, right? Because so anyway, we did that, and so the study was a bit inconclusive. And then I had another student look at teeth. So the Ontario Ministry of Natural Resources receives raccoon carcasses to test for rabies. And so they have like walk-in freezers full of dead raccoons. And so I had a student go down and spend a couple of days, actually measuring teeth and like counting teeth. And, we have a whole data set about tooth health, I guess, oral health in these raccoons that I still have to sort out. But the initial results were indicated that, yes, raccoons that live in areas that are more urban and have more access to garbage have, worse teeth. Which may have consequences, of course, downstream.
And again, a reflection of us, right?
Yes, 100%.
We get compliments from the
Well,
same
yes,
thing.
and we all brush our teeth and we all are supposed to floss, but raccoons, despite their nimble fingers, have yet to evolve the capacity to use a toothbrush. So
maybe we need to throw some toothbrushes in the garbage.
Something like that. Yeah. Just don't play with raccoons. That's
Fair enough.
My take-home message.
Again, that was evolutionary ecologist Albrecht Schulte-Hostedde from Laurentian University. Thank you so much for talking raccoons with us.
It's been a pleasure.
And that was The Big Story. We'd love to hear your thoughts on this conversation. Send us an email at hello@thebigstorypodcast.ca. You can reach us on Instagram at Frequency Pods or on Blue Sky at The Big Story. If you know someone that might enjoy this episode, be sure to send it to them. You can listen to The Big Story every day on the Seeker app or wherever you get your podcasts. I'm Kaitlin Lee. Thanks for listening.